disclosure of these non-human beings, whatever they are, and however many different types there are, they have been with us for all of our recorded history. There has never been a time in our recorded language, in our spiritual writings, in our recorded history, that we have not been in the presence of non-human intelligence that has been right alongside with us taking this journey. And that when we finally acknowledge that these things are real, that's only the beginning of the journey. And so the whole film is about, well, once we accept this reality, as we should be, what is next?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to First Contact. Today's guest is very special. His name is Ron James. Ron James is a filmmaker, an on-camera personality, writer, editor, researcher, entrepreneur, and media relations director for MUFON, which I know you guys have seen. If you've seen my other episodes, we've had other MUFON people on as well. It's the Mutual UFO Network. He also serves on the board of directors of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which you know we love them, and Dan Harari and the crew, where he works to bring the truth about UAPs into mainstream culture through entertainment and media. And today he's on the show because he's actually just released a really cool film called Accidental Truth. Next, Beyond UFO Disclosure. It's a sequel to a film that came out in 2023, just came out and has already hit #1, which is really exciting. And so today we are going to have the first exclusive peek into the film, the making of the film, the exciting stories you got to witness. And then, of course, we'll be having some fun conversations about consciousness and reality as well. So very excited for this chat today. Welcome to the show, Ron James.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I love it. Okay, so first of all, I always like to ask people, all guests that come on the show, they get asked this question. How on earth did you get into this field? So tell us what a little bit about your backstory, what got you interested in this kind of work?
Yeah, I was always into the topic as a kid growing up. Chariots of the Gods was the first and still to this day the only real theatrical UFO documentary that made it into the mainstream. Had a very profound effect on me early on. And as I grew up, I was always following the topic as a aficionado, so to speak, as a fan. And then when I was living in Sedona sometime, I think it was right around 2006, Stephen Bassett, who has Paradigm Research Group, he's been a longtime lobbyist and activist in the UFO field. He came through town and I decided that I'd like to meet him and interview him, so I did. And when he found out that I owned a production company, because I actually own a production company that does video work, live events, and all that kind of thing. When he found out that I did that, he invited me to go to Washington, D.C. and live stream his X conference and also the citizen hearing on disclosure, which came later. So when I went there, all of a sudden, all these guys that I'd seen on television, I'm hanging out with them. I'm like, oh, there's Nick Pope, there's Stanton Friedman, there's George Knapp. And so I got to actually know these people. And early on, Nick Pope had been a big influence on me. And, he just passed away, which is a shame. He's in my film. I've interviewed him 7 times over the years. He's always been a friend. But back in the day, before I was involved in the topic, Nick was actually writing a column for UFO magazine while he was still in the Ministry of Defense. So I thought at the time, it was like, look, here's this guy, he's in the government, and he's talking to the UFO community like we deserve to be talked to and taken seriously. And back at that time, he was one of the few guys doing that. And then we had Stanton Friedman, who is unfortunately no longer with us, but this guy was a nuclear physicist that was talking about UFOs. And so to me, these two men brought the most credibility to the field. And when I finally got to meet them and shoot interviews with them and all the other people that I met at that event, I realized that we are really dealing with the biggest deception ever put forth in front of humanity, and that I had a chance as a filmmaker and as a voice to try and do something about it. So that's what I chose to do. So I cover the nature of reality in my work a lot. I cover life after death and the ET Are We Alone question in all of my original productions are within those three categories.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely want to get into the reality and consciousness side of things as well, because that's what really excites me. I would love to know first, now, since you have this film, what are some of the highlights that people can expect to see when they watch your movie?
Well, it starts off, it is literally two movies in one. I've had people say that, and I was like, well, it's one journey, but it really is two movies. The beginning is all of the things that I did and went through in Washington, D.C., trying to find out for myself what was going to happen with disclosure there. So we spend some time going behind the scenes, inside Congress, inside offices, inside private conversations. We have a whole section about the inside story about how David Grush was brought forth to the public as told by Ross Coulthart and Ralph Blumenthal together, the two men who broke the story with Leslie Kean. And then we have some new materials cases because what we're finding is that UFO experiencers who I believe are going to have their moment, well deserved, soon, uh, and be free from the ridicule and things that they've had to put up with over the years. A lot of times they are now getting physical samples of stuff. And so we have three stories about experiencers that were given materials that are defying explanation. This is stuff you're not going to see anywhere else. One of the samples we actually brought back to Washington, D.C. and turned over to Kirsten Gillibrand to give to Arrow, and that all plays out very interesting. But then in the last part of the movie, we delve into once we accept a non-human intelligence, then what is next? Because in my mind, that's only the beginning. At that point, we have to start asking all new questions. And the film explores, what those categories might be, what is the nature of reality, what is the true nature of consciousness, and AI, and all of these things that are coming into play that we didn't even see before. And so the film starts off with nuts and bolts through Washington, D.C., and takes the viewer to the edge of reality.
That sounds incredible. And you know what? I think it's about high time that these sorts of films started getting out there because a lot of the sort of older narratives around ETs, UFOs have typically been focused on kind of like a doomsday type vibe, like the aliens are gonna come and it's all gonna be like hell. And of course, any experiencer will tell you a majority of the time that it's actually a positive experience. In fact, there have been studies, like for example, Raniero Hernandez did a very large study with over 3,000 people, and over 70% of people actually said that they had a positive experience, or they got healed, or they had an increase in their psychic abilities, or just felt better, lighter, more loving as a result of their interactions. And so it's really great to see that the nature of consciousness is being explored simultaneously because I think you can't really extricate the two, can you? I mean, so for so long, people have really tried to focus on the nuts and bolts side of things, and I think that's been valuable to a point. But I think we are starting to really come to that conclusion that it is a consciousness-based phenomenon. So, what have you learned through the process of making the film and everybody that you've talked to? What have you actually learned about the nature of reality?
Well, Ray Hernandez is actually in the film. I've worked with him since the founding of the Free Foundation, and so him and I have been friends and on the same page for a long time. He's one of the very first people to try to say, him and Rudy Shield, Dr. Rudy Shield, who works with Ray, that all of these contact modalities, as he would call them, are connected. So, in other words, the same thing that makes it possible to see a ghost or makes it possible to have what you may call angelic or demonic encounters, it's all the same mechanism within physical reality that makes these non-human encounters possible. And this is something that materialist science obviously has a real struggle with. We have Rizwan Virk, who is the cutting edge guy for simulation theory right now. And the fact that we're living in a simulation it's almost undeniable at this point. But people have a really hard time wrapping their head about what that means. If you tell people this is a simulated reality, and they're all like, "Oh, I'm not an avatar. I'm not plugged into some machine like in the Matrix, and I'm living in a bowl of soup." They don't understand what it means. So I try to break it down for people in a way that's easier to digest. And so one thing that I tried this experiment at Contact in the Desert just a few days ago. I asked the audience, I said, How many of you believe that consciousness is fundamental? And almost everybody raises their hands. And of course, I'm sure you understand this, and a lot of your audience probably does too. If you accept consciousness as being fundamental, what that actually means is that you're acknowledging that consciousness is the root force of existence, and everything else springs forth from consciousness. But then when I said, and how many of you believe that we're living in a simulated reality? And almost nobody raised their hand. And so it's an interesting dichotomy because if consciousness is fundamental, reality is by default a simulation because it's a illusion of physical matter springing forth from conscious energy. There's no other way to actually describe it. So we really have to come to grips with the fact uh, that we are living in a simulation and that we are conscious spiritual beings having a human experience, and this simulation that we live in is the mechanism by which that human experience is made possible. So, yeah, we got a long way to go, and as far as understanding any of this, and we are not yet asking the right questions, and frankly, I don't think we're ready to cope with the answers.
Yeah, and I think you've hit a really important nail on the head there. I think, and this is just from my experience, I think a lot of people, especially who come at it from more of that spiritual lens, probably don't resonate with the word simulated because it makes it sound artificial or like a video game or something like that, which I think sometimes oversimplifies the experience we're having because this human experience in some ways does feel very real. It feels very realistic. This physical reality is a big part of the way that we interact with consciousness. But I think if you told them that this reality is a product of energy or frequency, suddenly I think people are a bit more open to the concept of that you can have something very vast like consciousness that then converges into physical form, which is by concept we're talking about the same thing, but I think people just
Yeah.
need put a word on that so they can kind of wrap their heads around what it is that we're actually saying. Um,
Yeah, we really try to do that in the film, make it a little easier to digest because it's
yeah.
inescapable. It's only a matter of time before we prove it. I mean, in my opinion, we've already proven it, but that's a whole nother conversation. But the fact of the matter is that we're spiritual creatures having a human experience. If we spring forth from consciousness, then we come into this reality. This reality is being created to facilitate our ability to live in a physical world. And if you look at the very basics of what quantum physics and science is telling us, just two main key points. One of them is that this stuff that we call matter, this table that I'm sitting at, this chair I'm sitting in, it's all agreed by all of science that this is not really here. This is energy vibrating at certain frequencies, and somehow we're reading these frequencies and creating matter that we perceive through some mechanism of the brain. And then if you look at the way the universe works, everything is a cascading set of algorithms. It's mathematics. There's no other way to describe our physical reality except a program. And when we go down and we look at all of the ancient religious teachings, literally every single one will tell us that we are living in an illusionary world, which again is a simulation. We have the Maya, we have the Grand Illusion. Even Islam speaks of this reality being almost a laughable illusion. They almost treat it with disdain. It's one of the reasons why martyrism and dying is not such a big deal to that particular religion because they don't think there's anything serious about this reality. So it's not just what science is telling us, it's what our ancient spiritual teachings have been telling us too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've done a bit of work around near-death experiences or life after life experiences. What does that tell us about reality as well?
Well, I mean, it tells us the same thing. It tells us that that we're living in an illusionary world, and that when our physical bodies die inside of this matrix, our consciousness survives. You know, it's certainly not known to what extent our consciousness survives, and there's a lot of different myths and legends and lore about what happens when we die. But we have enough cases of people coming back from these after death experiences to tell us that we definitely continue. And there's some consistency in these cases. In fact, a lot of consistency to give us some idea that we continue on. And so that just adds to the fact that we're living in an illusionary world. for whatever reason. And that's when it comes down to spirituality and how you want to look at it and what you want to believe. But I think that this principle extends to all life forms throughout the universe. There's one type of life that we see here, and that is the life like us. We, in order to come into this simulation, we take on a flesh and blood life form and we live a life. We're born, we die inside a flesh and blood body, and that is how we exist and navigate while we're here. But I believe there's also a type of being that still originates from the conscious energy, but it is able to transcend in and out of the simulation without having to take physical form on a permanent basis. So in other words, it gives us the reason that we see things like ghosts and angels and demons and interdimensional beings and all of the different things that are without body, but still able to come in here in some way and interact with us. I believe that's a whole different type of life that can transcend the matrix that we're seeing in a lot of these encounters. And then it's quite possible that there's a third type of life that actually originates inside the system. And that would give us the explanation for AI and robotic gray aliens that are like biological robots. And the reason that some of these beings have such an interest in what we call our souls is because maybe if you're born within the simulation, you're not getting out. And so, like I said, these are all very wild theories. I don't have them in the film, but it's something I'm definitely entertaining as a result of these journeys. And these are the kind of things that we need to start thinking about and trying to answer.
Yeah, I love that. And so tying this in with ETs or non-human intelligences, specifically around the galactic side of things, how does this understanding of consciousness explain the existence of those beings that could be residing in other places, other dimensions? How does that work?
Well, if consciousness is fundamental, then everything springs forth from it. We tend to look at our existence through a very narrow lens, but what we don't understand is that it's quite possible that, you know, all variety of other beings that spring forth from consciousness are on their own journeys, doing their own thing for their own reasons that have nothing to do with us. And then in some cases, they may be interacting with us. A conscious a being that originates from consciousness and takes a flesh and blood reality here, whether it's a Palladian or, somebody from Zeta Reticuli or reptilian, whatever, all these different types of aliens that are described, they're all still spiritual creatures having their experience within the system. And when we look at, you mentioned like from a galactic standpoint, if you do a thought experiment and you look at the history of the universe, the length of time that it's been here, and the propensity for life to spring forth. I believe it's only a matter of time until we get that acknowledgement. Hey, Webb telescope found a planet and there's lights on it. That those kinds of things are right in front of us for coming. And you look at how old the universe is, and then you look at the standard trajectory for a civilization. You're going to evolve. If you don't destroy yourself, eventually you're going to evolve a serious level of technology. You're going to be able to do the kinds of things that are only theories now. You're going to be able to traverse the universe through wormholes and bend time and space and have technology that does that. And you are going to have technology that can be very, very destructive. And you are also going to, at some point, develop artificial intelligence to the point where it is almost a foregone conclusion of any civilization that eventually it will integrate with its technology, which is all a little bit scary. But it's also, I believe, true. And so if you look at spacefaring races, and you are able to, have that discussion with yourself to the point where you can acknowledge that there's a likelihood of spacefaring races out there with the technology and the firepower that they have, in order to prevent just wanton destruction of each other, there would have to be some kind of loose alliance. I mean, it might not be like, all love and light, Federation of Planets, everybody gets along. because different species, I'm sure, have different agendas and entirely different sets of ethics and everything else. But there would have to be at least some sort of acknowledgement of each other's right to exist, and a non-aggression, non-violence treaty, or else the whole entire universe and all the spacefaring races would eventually destroy each other. And if that is happening, then it stands to reason that Earth is certainly a valuable piece of real estate from a galactical standpoint. I just say galactical. Is that a word? I just made it up. That's pretty
Sure.
good. From a galactic standpoint, there's not that many planets that are in the sweet spot with water and life and so much diversity. And so it's quite likely that there's different species that all have a different interest in this planet. And some of them may not have anything to do with us. And then there's a possibility that there's races and beings that have been here. If you live on Earth long enough, you're going to get wiped out. That's just a foregone conclusion. Sooner or later, an asteroid, a volcano, a solar flare, something is going to really mess up life on the surface. So the best place to live on Earth, and if you want to make it, for a long time, is underground or under the water. And we've got plenty of evidence of past civilizations that seem to be far more advanced than we acknowledge. So all of these things come into play, and then you got to start saying, well, okay, so what questions are we going to ask now? Because it opens up all new avenues of discussion.
I do have one question, and that is my understanding of all of these galactic races, from what I've experienced myself and also what I've heard from others, is that they all know each other and they know about each other's existences. And even if they're in different dimensional frequencies, they at least have an awareness of each other. I don't think they're
Hmm.
all peacefully existing. I definitely do know of wars that people have spoken about in these spaces. And so I think like you said, all these beings are in their own spiritual evolution at different stages, different phases of their own journey. At the same time, though, why is it that us human beings on Earth, we seem to be the like more isolated than everybody else? Like for our planet and our humans, there's maybe a small, very small percentage of people who might do things like channel or receive telepathic messages or have actual communication and contact with these beings, but that's not the majority or what's known in the mainstream. That's a very small portion. So in that regard, why do you think we are still only just coming into this awareness when everyone else seems to already have it?
Well, time is one factor. There's universe is billions of years old. So there's been time for races to evolve. And when you talk about different races and factions that have had wars, I'm sure that's possible. Something happened to Mars. We don't know what, but it looks like I follow the work of John Brandenburg, who says that there's irrefutable evidence that there was a nuclear explosion on Mars, and that's the only way you get that type of radiation. And I've researched him and looked into his work, and he's right. So, yeah, certainly there is probably a history of war, certainly in the breadth of time in the of the past. But us, humanity, we're not that old, and we're certainly not that mature. I would think that perhaps, and I kind of agree with this, that there is once a race shows a certain level of potential, then they are allowed to self-determine. It's kind of like the Star Trek Prime Directive, you might say. We somehow or another, rather, our genetics were altered so that we could be slaves and mine gold, like Zachariah Sitchin said when he wrote Genesis Revisited, or any other reason why genetic manipulation would result in a new race. At some point, I believe, have been protected, for lack of a better word, and allowed to self-determine and determine our own outcome. And that is why we don't see, that's why we're not part of this big galactic family yet, because we haven't matured into it. We are not, if you took Vladimir Putin and gave him a spaceship, I mean, can you imagine that? This guy he'd be wreaking havoc throughout the universe. And I think that these beings and these races have worked very, very hard to have at least some level of peace. And so you can't let a bunch of monkeys with guns into the galaxy. And so we have to prove that we're going to be able to be a good addition to the family, or they can do without us. And I think, frankly, it's up to us to prove that and to determine it. And There's some that don't care if we make it. There's some that want to see us plowed under so they can do something else with the planet. And there's some that want to welcome us into a brotherhood of spacefaring races. And so not everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely something to be said for the multiple agendas that exist out there. And I think some people are just starting to wrap their heads around it because, I think, well, this is just what I've seen in spiritual communities, especially, is people kind of go one of either way. They kind of demonize these beings as being like all bad, or they idolize them almost like gods. And I think we have to stay balanced in the perspective that just like we have lots of humans with lots of different agendas who all want different things, I think that same concept applies galactically as well. So, yeah, I think it's very interesting. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times that we should be asking a different set of questions. What questions should we be asking once we understand that reality is a product of consciousness and could potentially just be an illusion or a simulation?
Then we get into things like free will, the illusion of free will. We get into things like subjective reality versus consensus reality. And once we realize that a lot more of the world that we are experiencing is subjective reality. As Rizwan Virk says in the movie, there is no central computer and we're all plugged into it. We're all rendering our own version of this reality based on interpretation of the patterns. In other words, you're in Australia. You are looking at a completely different set of eyes. You're seeing a completely different world, and every single one of us is doing that. We have this central place, the simulation in which we interact, but we're rendering our reality within our own computers. And so, just like in a computer game, if you walk down a road and you turn right, that road that you turned right on was not manifested until it needed to manifest for you based on the algorithms that the program is instructed to follow. And this reality works a lot in the same way. And so the reason I'm saying this is because where we end up is, what are these things here for? If they're part of the simulation, they can be written in, written out. You can hit them with the cosmic keyboard. For many people, it's almost as though the phenomena of contact with non-human intelligence is being provided to them to open their eyes to complete different versions of reality. And if they're just here as teachers and beacons to make us think, wait, what's really going on here? Then that is a whole purpose among itself. And so, the question becomes, well, why are they really here? And are they really here? Or are they just here to make the puzzle a little easier for us to solve? So the amount of questions that are opened up by what we call disclosure far outweigh the answers we're going to get by somebody saying, yes, there's non-human intelligence. They've been here for a long time. That's just the beginning of the discussion.
What does that mean for the human race in the everyday sense of the word? I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are like, okay, well, if the ETs exist, that's great. So what? I'm still going to get up, go to work, have breakfast, spend time with my kids. I'm still going to do all the things I'm doing. So what impact do you really think that this disclosure or this awareness is going to have for us in the long term?
That's a great question. And I used to think, Eesha, that uh, yes, we can handle the truth, but I realize now it's far more nuanced than that, and it has a lot to do with context. So, in other words, if we were to get an official disclosure and they came out and they said pretty much what you just said, hey, there's ETs, there's aliens, we've known about them for years. They're not bothering us. There's nothing to worry about. We'll let you know more when we know more, which would of course not be completely true, but people would be like, okay. And you're right, they would go about their business and they'd say, hey, keep us posted. We're living in in a time where we have whole generations that grew up watching Ancient Aliens. So people already pretty much have, I believe the majority at this point, have an understanding that there's probably life other than Earth, that they may be very well interacting with us, and that the government and business and industry all know way more about it than they're telling us. All of that stuff, I think, is kind of baked into the culture at this point, a lot more than it used to be. So, But then if they were to come forward and say, "Hey, there's non-human intelligence. We don't think some of them like us. We have to be prepared. We have to be careful. We don't know what they want. They have technology that's way in advance of anything we have. We cannot defeat them. We cannot defend against them, and they might not like us, and they might want this planet." Well, that's a whole different reaction, right? What was like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'm going back to work," is now mass panic and people freaking out on everything on an existential level. So it's all about the context of disclosure and what we determine uh, some of these beings really want.
Yeah.
And then how do you tell the people if it's not good news?
I think that's what a lot of the government and that are kind of afraid of because it might not be all love and light. It might not be all positive. And I think there's definitely some fear around that. In saying that, though, in the last probably 5 to 7 years, there's been quite a strong movement towards disclosure. Comparatively, some people would say it's still like a tiny little drip, but compared to what it was 2, 3 decades ago, we've definitely seen documents being released. Like, for example, the ones that came out this year, we've seen committees being formed to formally analyze this and not pretend like it doesn't exist, which is what was happening in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So, what are your thoughts around the current movement towards disclosure and particularly the recent release of the files from the White House?
If people are paying attention to their history, you'll know that what we're getting right now was literally a repeat performance of something we got back in the 50s. We had General Samford come forward saying, "Yes, there's technology flying around our ships, we don't, our planes, we don't know what they are. They're not ours." We had Don Kehoe, military guy, coming out saying, "Yes, we're capturing flying saucers, we're recovering them." Then you had a whole gigantic flame up of interest in the topic. You had dozens, literally hundreds of books. You had the birth of MUFON. You had Project Blue Book. You had movies and documentaries, and it was just a craze all across the country. And so and then we got just a little bit of acknowledgement from the government, and that was it. It kind of died down. And what we have now is really, it's like they hired the same screenwriter and they didn't even really bother to change the script very much. We have the same thing. Government insiders saying there's technology that we don't understand, a few pictures here and there. This latest government release, it's underwhelming at best. A lot of this stuff has been debunked already. Almost all of it in the first tranche was already in the public domain. People already knew about it. And so if this is disclosure, whoever is in charge is not paying attention to the facts and they're not being read into the truth. And they're really giving us a very disappointing dog and pony show that needs to stop. They've had 100 years to tell us the truth, and at the rate they're going to drag this out for another 100 years if they can get away with it. And there's people that say this is controlled disclosure. It's already been mapped, it's already been scheduled. It's going to take X number of years, and these are the facts that we're going to reveal. We're going to see how the public absorbs them, and then we're going to reveal more. And the people that are doing that, I believe a lot of them are kicking and screaming the whole way. They don't want to disclose at all. I am at this point in time, I'm of the mind of, you know what, guys, you've had enough time. There's something else called catastrophic disclosure, where so much information just gets released, whistleblowers come forward, evidence is delivered, and the whole thing just blows up in their face. And frankly, I'd like to see that happen. I think that we're playing their game their way at this point, and we've been doing it for a long time, and they've been getting away with a lot of things. They've lied to the society. They've covered up technological breakthroughs that could have changed the course of human civilization. They've made themselves rich. They've favored certain corporations that have been able to thrive while other corporations did not have that benefit. There's patents, there's technology, there's legalities, there's all kinds of reasons that they're doing it the way they're doing it. And frankly, I'm like, you know what? Too bad, guys. You made your bed, sleep in it. It's time to just put this out and once and for all.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I think the biggest disclosure is literally seeing a starship, a craft outside your window, or like having having an experience, which I know there are specific places on the planet where you do get heightened activity. You've been to Sedona, so tell us a little bit about what you have encountered there personally.
Yeah, so Sedona has always been a metaphysical hotspot, and I've lived there twice, and I split my time now between LA and Sedona. I'm in LA right now. But there's always been UFO activity there, and there's always been very strange Earth energies. And what we find about Sedona is that it's this place that has these giant red rocks. I mean, monolithic mountains of red stone. And that red rock is actually a form of crystalline structure. And we have Thunder Mountain at the top of Sedona, that is one of the most lightning struck places on the planet. And there's a theory that somehow or another this electrical energy gets into the geology and stores energy and resonates energy, and it creates a lot of different anomalies that we don't yet understand. People say there's portals there. Uh, so there is a scientific basis for Sedona being such a magical place. But there's also, and this has been proven, I helped News Nation come to Sedona and do a story about these secret bases. We have bases. There's literally a canyon there called Secret Canyon, and in the past, there's legends and lore of people that have gone out and tried to hike into the canyon and been run off by men with guns and military outfits. And on many, many nights, you can go and there's, certain lookouts and perches where you can see deep into the canyon. And what you will see is military helicopters. You can tell by the aviation lights and the way they're moving around. And then every once in a while, this some kind of a ball or an orb of significant size will come up out from behind the mountains. It will get a big glow around it, and then it'll disappear. And this has been documented so many times. There's countless videos of this happening. And we know that there's bases and tunnels there because we've been able to find out by ground penetrating radar we believe it's connected to Denver. We believe it's connected to Dulce, New Mexico, as part of a giant underground network of tunnels that has been being built for years and years and years with maglev trains, the whole 9 yards. This is a thing. It's not just something that people are making up. So we know there's this base there, and we know that they're doing some kind of testing of technology that is not acknowledged. And so this is a common occurrence in Sedona. You can go there. They actually have UFO tours where they will take you out and show you this happening. And it defies explanation. And of course, there's nothing but official denial. There's a cement plant there. That's what they call it. And the cement plant is owned by a subsidiary of one of the big defense contractors. And this cement plant is guarded with armed guards, and people get in and out. And there's giant piles of rock and everything all around this place where obviously tons of debris over the years have been removed from inside the earth. So we know this is going on, and it's, you can document it. So Sedona is a very interesting place.
Right. And I think that ultimately is the disclosure. I mean, they can release files, not release files. Anything can be happening in the media, but if you physically were to go there yourself and see that, I think anyone in that position would start asking some more questions, right? So I think disclosure isn't just reliant on the government. I think there's also that aspect of, human experiences. People, I mean, there are so many experiences out there who are sharing their stories about things that they've seen, things that they've witnessed. And I think it's about time that those things started being taken more credibly as well, because at the end of the day, if 10,000 people have seen something and witnessed something and experienced something, whether it's documented by the White House or not, kind of becomes irrelevant at some point, right?
Eesha, you hit the nail right on the head, and that's where the whole conversation is going. And I'm sorry, we should have gotten there sooner. I was meandering all over the place, but the fact of the matter is, you're right. We're only going to get so much information from the government. It's going to be a dead end. We're never going to get the entire truth. But where we are getting the truth is the personal encounters and experiences of the experiencer community, people that are having messages given to them. They're having experiences that they simply can't deny. Things are happening that once it happens to you, there's nothing that's ever going to convince you that it didn't happen. And so these are where the truths are going to be uncovered. And we have to start, in order to make sense out of any of this, we have to take the nuts and bolts science. We have to look at our whole vision of materialist science, of time and space, of the nature of consciousness. And we have to be willing to start listening to some more esoteric possibilities, because materialist science and nuts and bolts are failing us in understanding this.
Yeah, you did make a comment before about certain proofs that have potentially already happened, that we've already arrived at certain conclusions. I know it's still very frontier sort of science at the moment, but there are a lot of theories out there, theories of consciousness especially, that do lend themselves to the idea that all of this is possible and then some. So I think, people need to just start opening their minds, realizing that this physical reality isn't the be all end all of everything. And once you get past that barrier, then all those questions that you mentioned start to open up. What's really out there? What experience am I having?
Hmm.
What experiences could I be having? If I go out into the night sky and set an intention or meditate and then I see a craft, what does that mean about reality? Who are they? Right. And I think that's kind of where, I mean, I believe we need to take the conversation. What can we be doing as humans, regardless of what the government is doing? What can we personally be doing ourselves to discover this truth for ourselves?
Well, first we want to we need to want to discover it. There's a huge section of the population they're very happy in the Matrix and they're sleeping their way through their entire lives.
Yeah.
There's plenty of distractions that you can get absorbed in here and never even look inward and try to ponder the reason or the nature for your existence. And I can't tell people what to think about it. It's their own business, but the answers that you're not going to find the answers if you're not seeking the answers. And so if you're sidetracked by being engaged in this world to the point where you're not trying to figure out what it is and why you're here, then there's really not much you can say to those people. If they want to sleep, let them sleep. But the answer to all of it is the inner journey that will reveal all. So you can close your eyes, you can meditate, and you can come to a place where you begin to connect with things, and then truths will resonate with you. At the whole end of this movie, it's 40 minutes of postulating some crazy stuff, post-biological futures, what that means to our spirituality. Is AI an active force in the universe, and are we actually being controlled by it now? I'm not in any way, shape, or form asking people to believe in something. I'm giving them uh, possibilities that deserve exploration and saying, look, start asking questions. If we're not asking questions, then we're not going to get answers. But what's right for you, Eesha, might not be right for me. So our subjective reality of each of our journeys, just because you discover something, I could tell you, hey, Eesha, we're definitely living in a matrix. And you could say, that doesn't resonate with me at all. I believe that we're living in a physical world that came from somewhere. I can't even voice the other side of that argument. But whatever is, I know, right? That's how far down that rabbit hole I've gone. But whatever you believe and whatever resonates with you is going to work for you while you're here. You're not going to be deceived by your own inner voice. You're not going to be deceived by your own quest for your own spirituality. And so, this is a big giant sandbox, and we're all here for possibly different reasons. Some of us might be here to evolve and build our spiritual character. Others of us might have already succeeded at that, and we're just here to have fun. We don't know. But what we do know is that reality is subjective to all of us. It's not the same for any one of us. And when you start exploring, your heart knows the answers that you're meant to have, and they might not be the same answers as anybody else, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think you've put that so well. So, Ron, your movie is here to convey a message to the people. If you could summarize the purpose of why you created it or what message you hope to get across, what is the one key piece that you want people to take away after watching this film?
That we're not going to get answers from the government, not the answers we deserve, certainly not the whole truth, that the disclosure of these non-human beings, whatever they are and however many different types there are, they have been with us for all of our recorded history. There has never been a time in our recorded language, in our spiritual writings, in our recorded history, that we have not been in the presence of non-human intelligence that has been right alongside with us taking this journey. And that when we finally acknowledge that these things are real, that's only the beginning of the journey. And so the whole film is about, well, once we accept this reality as we should be, what is next? And that's really where I want to be. There's lots of UFO movies out there. There's lots of people making the same movie over and over again because there's nothing new to add to the conversation. This film advances the conversation.
I love that. So where can people find your film and watch it?
I'm not sure where it's available in Australia. I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon. I'm pretty sure that it's available on YouTube Movies and TV, and I know it's on Apple TV, so it should be available worldwide on all those places. And the website is accidentaltruthnext.com. And the very first Accidental Truth, you can actually watch that movie on YouTube. And both of these films are narrated by Matthew Modine. This new movie, he played Dr. Brenner in Stranger Things, and he was Joker in Full Metal Jacket. Very talented, prolific actor. Then we have Thomas Jane, who played the Punisher. He was a key player in Expanse. He's playing Dr. McCoy in a new Star Trek. He is in the film with some incredible insights. And then we have music by Alan Howarth, who's the composer that wrote the music for the Halloween movies and for John Carpenter's films, Escape from New York, They Live, things like that, Christine. And so we've got a really nice group of people. In addition, there's 22, 23 other people in the film. Almost anybody who's anybody in the field is in there, from scientists to Congress people to your favorite faces from Ancient Aliens. So yeah, the bottom that's a long answer to a short question. The bottom line is, yeah, it's time to acknowledge that we have non-human intelligence in our midst, start trying to figure out exactly what those are, and start asking what does that mean to me, you, and the future of humanity? What's next?
I love that. Thank you, Ron James. It's been a very fascinating conversation. And so I would highly encourage anyone who is watching or listening to this podcast, go check out the film Accidental Truth Next, Beyond UFO Disclosure. Check out the first one as well, and then watch both of them together. And if you genuinely want to connect with your galactic family, start opening your consciousness up and having these experiences, we at First Contact are all about human-led initiation of contact. So check out the links in the description below. You'll see the links to Ron James' film and where you can connect with him. You'll also see our links to 5 Days to 5D, where you can have an experience of higher consciousness for yourself. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. Tell all your friends about this episode, about all the beautiful things that we're talking about, and advancing this amazing conversation. Thanks, guys.
Isha, you are knee deep in it. You're on the cutting edge of where this is going. So good work.
Thank you.